everyone. I'm Mary Kinsey. Welcome again to Wyandotte, a history in itself. Many of us are familiar with the Wabeek dining room, which was located right here on Biddle Avenue. This particular business had been in business for 55 years. It was a family-owned organization, and many of us really enjoyed the food there. First of all, it was like going to a home-cooked dinner. Well, it closed, as I said, and we were rather disappointed about that. But you know, it's got some history, and of course, when I have to have information on a history, I always find one of our historians here in Wyandotte, and we're very fortunate to have Emerson Millhouse, and he's with us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
And welcome. Well, it's nice to have you here because you had a part in the Wabeek. And one of the things that you provided was the ice cream,
That's
wasn't
right.
it?
Yep.
Now, how many years did you do that?
About 25 years, I would say.
Uh-huh. All right. And then, of course, we were familiar with the grape juice with a little bit of sherbet. And that sherbet was from your ice cream company.
That's right.
And then this particular cup was a punch cup, and then once in a while when they had a banquet they used these candle holders. Well, I have a picture here of the Wabeek when it used to be called the tea room, and I'd like everybody to see that. Maybe a lot of our viewers will recognize it. It looked a little bit different in those days, didn't it?
Right.
It had a nice big It had a nice big porch on it, and it was not as large as it has been in the last few years. Okay, now we'll go to a taping that we had done of the Wabeek the week before it closed. So we'll just stand by and watch that.
Okay.
Well, here we are at the Wabeek as we have seen it in past years, and I know you're familiar with it too because you were a patron of the Wabeek. And Emerson, it had good food, didn't it?
Very good, very good.
What was the one that they were really outstanding?
One thing about the Wabeek, you could always depend on it being warm when you got it, and it was the same all the time. It was really good. Yeah.
Okay, now there is a beautiful door there. The structure of the building was very pretty too. And it was like going into a home, wasn't it?
That's right. It was Henry Roerich home. It was built in 1888 by Henry Roerich, who was one of our really leading citizens at that time.
Right now we're in the dining room, and I believe when I did this was about a week before they closed. And those tablecloths look so familiar, don't they?
Yeah. Well, it was such a crowd there on the last days, I had to have my dinner out on the porch.
Oh, you did? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, we had our dinner there. And,
now, this is a pretty room right here with that beautiful scene, that landscape.
On the back wall. I don't know who did that painting, but
I don't know.
It was pretty.
And then in that case that we saw had a lot of, here we come, of figurines.
Figurines on that case. Yeah.
Okay, now, wasn't this sometimes used at the banquet room, this room right here?
Yeah.
And then when they had big crowds, I remember one time when our family were here, we ate in that room because of a large group.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're all ready for the big crowd, which they did have, like you said. Okay, they had so many pretty pictures, and that was, I thought, was kind of pretty. They try to give it that homey touch.
I always liked the cuckoo clock.
Here's the cuckoo clock. Yeah.
That was given to them by employees, I believe.
Is that right?
I would have liked to have it, but they didn't put that up for auction.
No, they didn't.
No.
Now, this is the banquet room.
This is the banquet room.
And this is where the different groups would have their meetings, and this particular group is the Lions Club.
Yeah, they've met there for many years. In fact, that's the meeting right there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And not only the Lions, the Shriners and the Rotarians would
Also met
be there.
there. Yeah.
Okay, then we went in as they had closed the dining room, and they had all these pieces to be auctioned off.
Oh, yeah.
And there's those famous teapots. It's like you said, everything was nice and warm. You didn't get a cold plate or
You
anything.
never
It
got
was
a cold
always
plate,
warm.
that's right.
And here's some dinnerware.
You could always depend on it being that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I particularly liked their chicken on Sunday. That was one of my favorites.
yes.
Yeah. They roasted it and it wasn't greasy. It was just good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they'd always run out, so I used to have to, if I had some special thing going on, I had to run down there and reserve one for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, they had a lot of utensils there.
Oh, yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
there it goes on. But they did a nice job there.
They certainly did.
The coffee was good, and
They kept the kitchen real clean. It was one of the cleanest kitchens that I know of.
is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll see a picture of the
Yeah.
kitchen in a minute. And of course, they had to sell all those chairs.
Yeah. And those wonderful big thick steaks, boy, they were famous for that.
Is that right?
Yeah, when we had bowling banquets there, we'd always have that big steak, and that was delicious. Yeah,
Now we're in the kitchen.
yeah.
I understand that when they sold the Hobart dough mixer, with all the attachments, it sold for $3,100.
Oh, that was a good buy.
That was a good buy.
Yeah.
And did you know they even had a pizza oven there?
No, I didn't.
I didn't know they ever made pizza.
I never did indeed.
And that one sold for $1,200.
Oh,
As you said, it was a nice clean kitchen, and it certainly looked clean that day.
yeah.
That was one of the ovens. And a sink. Everything had a tag on it.
Yeah.
And the day of the auction, there were a lot of people who were restaurant owners there. There's a stove. Of course, it's a gas stove. That's what they usually
Yeah.
prefer, isn't it?
Yeah.
There we go. I think that's a warming oven. And some more sinks. They all have their
Yeah.
tags. Even had a tag on that little step stool. And then all the tables and the chairs were going to be auctioned off too. Now they had kept those there. Oh, and this is the famous menu. Always a sheet of paper with the typed in,
Yeah.
and the back was a leather folder, wasn't it? And it was good food, and it wasn't
Did
expensive.
you get a menu?
I didn't get a menu. However, I understand they're going to give one to the museum.
Museum?
So,
That would be nice.
yes. Here we are back. And then here's another picture. I didn't even know they had that picture of a little boy and girl. I think that was pretty. Then we went upstairs, and
There's
I-
a stained glass window.
isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
You know, some
in
people
front.
wanted to buy that, but someone from the funeral home bought it.
Oh, they
instead.
bought it.
And I didn't know they had a piano in there either. Did they have that down in the banquet room at one time?
Yeah, I believe they did.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then here's another beautiful stained glass window. But they weren't for sale. There are several things that they did not sell.
Yeah, one time we had our bowling banquet downstairs, I remember.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now here's the auction, and this was done by a group from Plymouth, and his name was Robert Montgomery, and he did a very excellent job. There's some familiar faces there. There's Mark and Ken
Yeah.
from the museum. They were trying to find some good buys. And it started at that particular point and went back in there. And then we're actually seeing some of the people as they were participating in the auction. Yeah, one thing about it, when you were the one that won the auction, then you had to pay 25% of that price at that time. You had to go to the runner and put that down. And if you did not have 25% of the price, then it was auctioned off again because they were getting getting many auctions. Now that lady was doing a lot of auctioning. I'd never been to an auction before, so it was kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Were you ever at an auction
Oh,
before?
yes. Oh, yes.
Does this look like the general way of
Usually,
holding it?
that's the way it is. Usually, in a big auction, you go in and register, and then you put your name, and they give you a number.
Oh.
And then when they start bidding, well, then you keep putting your card up, until...
I think that's what they did, too.
Yeah.
I remember there was a table set up, and
then when they get to the top, and then there's a recorder there, it records your number, and of course you go in and pay for it and get the item. That way they can keep right on going, with the sale.
And now this young man was holding up some plates. And this young lady here was one of their helpers, too. She was what they called the runner, and they would come to her. Oh, there's Vivian.
Oh,
the granddaughter of...
Denise.
Yeah, I mean Denise,
that's
sorry.
Denise, yeah.
That was Vivian's daughter, is Denise.
Yeah.
She was the hostess that last couple of weeks at the dining room. And here this lady is going to pay her 25%.
Yeah. Well, Denise worked in there when she was a girl, waiting.
Oh, is that right?
Waiting, yeah. And then after she got married, she moved away. And then, of course, they came back later years, and she worked in there with her mother in the kitchen. And, of course, sometimes on Sunday, she'd be dressed up and work the cash register out in front.
And here is the punch bowl. Isn't that a beautiful bowl?
Yeah.
And this glassware, similar to what we have right here. This one took a little bit longer. Well, welcome back. We're back in our studio here, and Emerson, we know that was a home that some people had lived in before it became a dining room. Now tell us, who owned that and built that home?
It was built by Henry Rarick, and he was a merchant here in Wyandotte. He was born in Wyandotte, in fact, and then he raised a family in that home. That was the Wabeek tea room. He had 4 girls and 1 boy, and they had some tragedy in the family. After building the home, he was postmaster in Wyandotte from 1993 to 1996. It's kind of funny back then because it seemed that Mr. Drennan was the postmaster prior to his being postmaster, and he had the post office over in the Drennan block, which was, they didn't have a permanent post office, so they had it from Maple to Sycamore Street on the west side of the street, which they used to call that the Drennan block. And of course he had the post office there. Then when Mr. Rorick became a postmaster, he moved it over on Biddle Avenue on the east side, between Oak and Elm Street, and that was where it was more. There used to be the Sullivan furniture store was in there after that, but he had one of them I remember very well because it was Johnny Cahalan, and Anita was one of the girls, and they went to a dance out in Ann Arbor, and on the way home, they run into the back of a truck and they were both killed. That was very, very much of a tragedy. And I used to play baseball with John over at the old Lincoln School, so I was kind of, when I heard that news. And then he had a boy that was a teller in the bank in Trenton, and he was shot in a hold-up attempt. So
really?
He had tragedy in his family. But the other 3 girls is kind of unusual because the last girl passed away in just before the Wabeek closed.
Is that
She was
right?
the youngest girl.
Oh, well, that's too bad.
Yeah. But he did have a men's store. Well, it was a clothing store on Biddle Avenue, just south of where we have McMurphy's store now.
Okay, well, you know, we do have some pictures here of it way back when. And I believe that we'll be seeing that in here. And that picture states was May 9th, 1907. And do you remember it then?
No, I wasn't here then.
You weren't born there,
No,
were you?
no, but my folks know him real well. And old papers, I didn't understand what it was all about. I have some old papers that Henry Rarick signed. He was also in the insurance business, you know.
Oh, he was?
And of course, it might have been insurance that they had bought from Mr. Rarick. But I kind of thought that it was a property dealing or something with some property because they did early days. But
Emerson, I have another picture.
yeah, that's the inside of the store. I remember my mother taking me in there and buying the suit of clothes, and it was Kuppenheimer clothes, and they were very good clothes. He handled a very good line of clothing. And Eddie Brohl waited on us, and he was just a young fellow working for Mr. Rarick, and he got to learn the clothing business from him. And then later on, he opened a store of his own up on the same side of the street, just a few doors down. So Eddie had that quite a few years. Well, in fact, during World War II, it was operating.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, here's another picture. It's a little bit later picture, and do you recall it when it looked like that?
That's the store as I remembered, and we're just south of McMurphy's. Yeah.
And how long were they in operation?
I was trying to think when Mr. Rarick died. It was in the 30s, and Mrs. Dunn had been up in a building on, I think Ernie Navarre had a clothing or linoleum business down below, and I think she started upstairs in that building. It was right next to the Woodruff Monuments.
Okay, now this particular building would be in the area that we would call, you say, McMurphy's, or past
Yeah,
that?
that was what the Raricks had, just south of that. In other words, McMurphy's, and then right next door would be Rarick's, you know, at that time.
And Emerson, you'd be surprised. We even found this stationery.
Oh,
And it looks like brand new, doesn't it?
it surely does, yeah.
And
It was in the museum. Does the museum have that?
yeah. And it says that it was dated about 1920.
Oh,
Was that about the time they were in their prime over there?
oh yeah, I would say so.
Of course, that was before your time, though.
No, I remember in
Do
the
you?
20s. Oh yeah,
Oh.
real well. In fact, I remember World War I.
You do?
Oh, sure did.
Oh, my.
Yeah,
How about
I
that?
remember I got into the shipyard because my father was taking ice cream in there for the workmen. And of course, I got to ride along in the truck with him when he went in to see him building these big ships. It's now where the new golf course is now.
Is that right? Okay, now I understand Mr. Rarick was a very energetic person, like you already alluded to the fact that he was in insurance. He was also a postmaster,
Yeah,
and he had this business.
yeah. And he was mayor of Wyandotte from 1899 and the new, that's almost 100 years ago, 1900. Apparently back then they elected a mayor every year.
Oh, I see.
And he had it for 2 years. He had it 1899 and 1900 was his 2 years. He was elected. He was postmaster from 1893 to 1897, I think, is when he was postmaster.
And then all this time, were they living in that
They lived in the big house.
in
yeah.
that big house? Okay. And he had this large family.
Yeah.
And then when did they decide to make it into a dining room or a tea room?
I would say it was around 1936, that she modified the house to make a tea room. And Mrs. Dunn herself did a lot of the serving of the food in the early days.
And her name was Vivian Dunn.
No, that was her daughter.
That was her daughter.
That was her daughter.
Oh, I
And
see.
Denise was her granddaughter.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then there was someone, was it her grandmother that used to cook over there? She's 95 years old, And
Oh, that was Jean. Jean started out with her in the tea room in the early days upstairs, and then she was with her all the years, and now they're in the home, the Mary, what is it, across the street?
Mary Frances
Mary
home.
Frances home.
So she's right across the
They're
street.
both, yeah, they're both in there now.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Now Jean is in there with them, yeah.
So they kind of keep their eye on the
Yeah,
the
Jean
lobby.
was like almost like a daughter, you know.
Oh, I bet.
She knew the business, yeah.
Okay, well, they haven't actually torn that building down yet, but I think there will be a lot of people that'll feel really
It's
bad.
a sad day. It is.
You know, there were some people who were at the auction said it was almost like going to a wake of an old friend.
Yeah.
You know, they were pretty
Yeah.
sad about, you know, this building just meant so much to a lot of us here.
Yeah.
And Emerson, you know so much about the family and the building itself, and this is great. Okay, can you tell me any more about Mr. Dunn? Is there anything that we missed?
No, I think pretty well. She worked real hard, I know that, and we always enjoyed going there. We went the last 2 days. We went on Friday, and then my daughter said, well, I got to go there, so we went on Saturday. So there's a big crowd both days to get in, but we had to have one last meal. And I had to have a steak, of course, but it wasn't a big steak like we used to get at the bowling banquets. We had a great big T-bone steak, and they were delicious. They were famous for that, you know.
You know what I enjoyed was their baked whitefish.
That was another favorite of ours. Yeah, we always had that.
And it wasn't a small piece. You got
No,
a
it
nice
was
big piece.
more than you could almost eat, yeah.
Yeah, and a baked
Yeah,
potato and so
yeah.
forth.
Baked potato was nice and crisp, yeah.
And of course, we could always finish off with the Mel House ice
That's
cream.
right, yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's not many places we can buy that Mel House ice cream anymore.
No, it's not so much anymore. That's right.
Then they were a pretty good customer of yours.
Oh yes, she was a very good customer for many years, yeah. And one of the favorites, of course, was we made his peppermint stick, and that went good.
Oh, I like
Yeah,
that one. Yeah.
You know, we had people who would call and wanted to buy smaller amounts of it, you know, peppermint stick. And they said, oh, we had that at the Wabeek, and we liked that. Yeah. Yeah.
And they were in these little glasses
That
here.
little glass, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell us any more about Mr. Wabeek? Mr. Rorick.
Rorick? Not really, except that he was one of our civic leaders in Wyandotte, of course. And he had a premonition about his daughter being killed. He waited up at that night, and when the state police came, knocked on his door, and early in the morning he knew that something had happened. So, yeah, that was sad.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and then to lose his only boy, you know, in that holdup, it's just tragedy too.
Okay, now, his store was right there on Biddle, like we were saying before. And can you remember any of the other stores that were near his business?
Frank Armstrong, of course, was on the corner, you know, in the old Arlington Hotel, and then there was a ladies' store in between, and then there was Murphy's. It was, I think, well, they used to call it the Bon-Ton in the early days during Prohibition, and it was a sweet shop, you know, you go in and get sodas and things of that sort.
Now, is that where R.P. McMurphy's is now?
McMurphy's is today.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then when Prohibition was repealed, well, then they set up a bar there. The Schroeders owned it, and they had Hugo Schroeder and Archie Schroeder had a bar in there, and eating, also a place to eat in there, like it is today.
In other words, back then there was a lot of activity on Biddle Avenue.
Oh, it certainly was. It was Friday and Saturday night was, you could hardly walk down the sidewalk. There were so many people.
That's all right.
You know, and of course people came into Wyandotte because there wasn't anything on the outlying district. When you got to 4th Street, well, that was the end of Wyandotte, you know.
That's right.
And,
I know it used to be Well, if I can't find it in Wyandotte, then I went downtown and Hudson's or
Oh,
something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, we didn't move into this neighborhood till, you know, a few years back. And prior to that, we lived in an adjoining neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember coming to Wyandotte to buy art supplies and, oh, and the dime stores. Didn't at one time, didn't you have a couple of dime stores
Yes, we
here?
did. We had Kresge's and we had Kinsel's was a drugstore. It was where the right on the old City Hall was Kinsel drugstore was there, and there was Kresge, and then there was what was the one on the corner of Maple Street? There was one right there, and bought a lot of things there. That was a big store. The one that burned down, you know. That was a big store in there. Yeah, there was a lot of different stores. We had a Grinnell on the other side. And I remember Rich's dining car. That's where the City Hall is now.
Oh, is
and
it?
it was really a dining car is what it was. It's kind of a funny thing. For a while back in the 20s, that was, I don't know if you remember that, but there were a lot of those old dining cars around.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
They tell me there's one in Ann Arbor. I haven't located it yet, but I've got to do that, where it was just a dining car. Mr. Rich had good hamburgers, I remember, and he'd have it on bread. He'd give it to you on bread. That was the way you got your
Was that right?
hamburger.
Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness.
Then, of course, the library, the old library was next to it, and then the Majestic Theater, and then there was a watch repair on the corner, and we had 3 theaters. We had the Majestic, of course, that was, and the Rialto was across the street where McLaughlin's furniture is, and then the Star was further down. We could get in there for a dime.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So then we had 3 theaters at that time. You know, I was reading some things about the Wabeek, and they said that one evening the 3 Stooges went in there. They were at one of the theaters here. So they went in there, and I guess they were doing some horseplay.
Oh.
And Mr. Dunn, I believe, got a little upset with them. He was afraid they were going to have a food fight.
Oh.
So he kicked them out.
Oh.
But I understand a lot of famous people had eaten there.
They did. I remember when I was a little tot, my mother had some friends that was appearing at the Majestic Theater, and they had just a short length of time so they came over and had dinner at our house on the corner there, and they were all painted up, and I was all impressed with the paint, you know, that they had on. Of course, they didn't take that off until after the show was over, but they were appearing at the Majestic. They always had the matinee, you know, and they had the before the movie started, they always had that.
Okay, well, we know there was a lot of interesting things going back way back when, and I sure appreciate you coming in and talking with us. As I say, when I need somebody to talk about history, you are always available. So thanks again, and we want to welcome everyone who watched Wyandotte, A History in Itself. So until next time, this is Mary Kinsey saying we'll be looking for you on our show.